Let's begin our day by learning about a topic which holds great significance for organizations in the healthcare industry. And this is pharmacovigilance. Pharmacovigilance is the topic. Pharmacovigilance inspections might seem daunting to many healthcare and pharma companies, and so we have an expert here with us today who's going to tell us all about the process. Please put your hands together to welcome Mr. Raj Bhogal, Head of Regulatory Inspections R&D Quality, Takeda Pharmaceutical & Co. Mr. Raj. Sorry, that's you. I'm so sorry. Okay, a big round of applause for Raj. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And firstly, I'd like to thank IFAH for inviting me here today to talk to you about pharmacovigilance system inspections. We've had some great presentations talking about different aspects of healthcare, but pharmacovigilance is key to my heart. So the views and opinions expressed in the presentation are those of myself and not representing Takeda Pharmaceuticals. So Taki yesterday from the Middle East, our general manager, did a great presentation and talked about Takeda as an organization and what we do. Patients' safety is at the center of everything we do, and I think that's important in healthcare and applies to a lot of us in the room today. So I'm going to talk about pharmacovigilance, pharmacovigilance inspections, the pharmacovigilance system legislation, some regulatory agency trends and inspection findings, and the consequences of poor inspections. So can we have a show of hands of those that have been involved in some type of inspection across GXP, whether it's GCP, GVP, GMP, or GDP? Great, there's a few in the audience. So I think before I start, everything we do is regulated in the pharmaceutical industry. And because it's governed by different pieces of legislation, whether it's local legislation or national or global legislation, the regulatory agencies are inspecting against those pieces of legislation. So that's where this topic is surrounded. So the importance of pharmacovigilance. There may be many of you in the room that have not heard of pharmacovigilance or don't understand what pharmacovigilance is. Pharmacovigilance is the science and activities related to the detection, assessment, understanding, and prevention of adverse events or other medicine-related problems. So if we think about the medicines we take and we experience something, that's really, it's all about safety and the safety of our medicines and how that's reported into the pharmaceutical companies. So pharmacovigilance in the product lifecycle, if we think about drug development, it takes many years for drugs to get to the market. So before a medicine is authorized for use, it goes through clinical trials. During the clinical trials process, we have a small number of patients selected in the different phases of clinical trials. And because we have a small number, there's only so much data we can obtain about the safety of the medicines we take. After authorization, the medicine's used in a larger population. It's used in a population that's taking other medications. So what happens when those drugs interact? There may be new side effects or new safety information that emerges. Therefore, it's essential that we monitor the safety of all medicines throughout the life cycle of that product in the healthcare practice. So the objectives of the pharmacovigilance inspections are really to determine that marketing authorization holders or pharmaceutical companies that are marketing those products have the necessary personnel, systems, and facilities to meet their pharmacovigilance obligations, to identify, to record, and to address non-compliance, which may pose a risk to public health. So we use the inspection process. Internally within companies, we have our audit program, but externally, the agencies have an inspection process. And this is evolving. So it started off in the UK. I mean, the MHRA they have a very well-established program. It's also well-established in the EU, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the Middle East and with the Arab GVPs, and also what's impacting Dubai and Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So when we're doing audits or whether we're doing inspections, so whether they're in-house audits conducted by quality or whether they're external agency inspections, we all take a risk-based approach. And those risks are really related to the inspection history. What do we know about the company? What do we know about the investigator sites that may be performing those trials? And then we look at the products. So what are those requirements for risk minimization activities for those different products being marketed by that pharmaceutical company? What's the history of the pharmaceutical company and how's that evolving? Have there been recent mergers, acquisitions? How many products do they have? And then we look at the pharmacovigilance system, and we'll go into a little bit more detail of what that looks like. Are there changes in qualified person responsible for pharmacovigilance? Is there a change in the local contact person? Are there changes to their pharmacovigilance system master file? Are there changes to the organization and management? All of these different factors we're talking about now impact the risks that the company is facing and how compliant they may be to the different pieces of legislation. So what is the PV system? For those of you that have experience of working in the research and development organization, you may be aware of all the different functions that we have. So in yellow on this slide are all the functions within R&D. So we talk about non-clinical, we talk about clinical, regulatory affairs, medical affairs, epidemiology. They're all functions outside of R&D that have an impact to our pharmacovigilance system. In grey, we have pharmacovigilance, so global safety. So obviously, all the safety information that's coming in about our products is going through to our pharmacovigilance department, and it's being processed. But what happens with all those other functions? We have commercial. So yesterday, my colleague Taka talked a little bit about patient support programs and market research. So all of the data that's collected from those is all feeding into our pharmacovigilance system and being analyzed, including product quality complaints. So if people are taking our products and they have some, they experience a complaint with our product, that also feeds in. So all of this information is analyzed, and at the center, we have the quality management system that governs the pharmacovigilance system. And that's everything we do, as I mentioned earlier, is governed by different pieces of legislation. So we have procedural documents. We're all trained to a certain standard. We have a process for documenting deviations. We're continuously improving our pharmacovigilance system. And therefore, we have a CAPA process. We have audits, so we're self-monitoring our performance and looking for areas of opportunity. We have metrics, so we're monitoring and trending our performance. And then we have the inspection management process. So I work in R&D quality, and I am responsible in Takeda for managing the pharmacovigilance system inspections globally. So how do we decide? So we get a call, or we know that we've got a notice from a different regulatory authority and we're having a pharmacovigilance inspection. How do we prepare for that? What does that mean? So sat in the UK, we hear of an inspection happening, for example, in Saudi Arabia. We think about the country of inspection. We think about the regulatory authority's experience. We think about whether the inspection's announced or unannounced. We think about how long the inspection is going to be conducted for. We have inspections varying from 1 to 2 days and even going up to 3 weeks with the FDA in the US. We look at previous inspection trends. We contact our network externally to see what intelligence we can gather about the health authority from our local colleagues, from our global colleagues. The language of the inspection. We've had some challenging experiences of going to China, and we've had 16 inspectors on site for 1 day. We've had to organize translators. They want to be in one room. So just think about managing 16 inspectors in one room covering different areas of our pharmacovigilance system. The scope of the inspection, when we say pharmacovigilance, people immediately think that's PV, that's drug safety, it has nothing to do with me. And we are trying to change that mindset within the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmacovigilance inspections, as I mentioned when I talked about the PV system, it impacts R&D, it impacts technical operations, commercial. So I think when we talk about the safety of our medicines, it's broader than just the pharmacovigilance department. We then look at our subject matter experts. So those people involved in the different aspects of PV, where are they located? How much experience do they have? And then we look at the scope of the PV system for our organization and what changes the PV system has gone through. We self-identify risk areas. I think when we're talking about inspection readiness, it's really important to self-identify those areas of risk and how we mitigate those risks. So what does inspection management look like? So for those that haven't had the experience of being involved in inspections, it's quite high-paced and it's fun because you're getting the teams together and you're looking at how to have a successful inspection outcome. And it's really rewarding when you go through and you start your prep and then you have the inspection and you see what the outcome is. And a successful inspection outcome obviously is great for the company's reputation. It's great for when we're filing for new products or variations. It's really important. We lead the inspection readiness activities. We work with our global teams. We work with our local teams. We reach out to, so if we were preparing for an inspection in Saudi Arabia or in Egypt, we reach out to our local drug safety officers and the local teams to get ready. We host the inspections or we delegate. So if we're not able to go to the country for whatever reason, or we don't have the expertise and we don't, sometimes the regulators want the inspection to be hosted by senior members of the local team. So we'll be there maybe in the back room supporting. We share lessons learned. I think the most important part of the pharmaceutical industry is networking. We're all here today, networking, sharing information, learning about different aspects of healthcare. That's really important. And sharing that knowledge that we gain with the different affiliates in the different countries. Working to coordinate those responses and corrective and preventative actions. It's really important that quality is involved in your processes and they're not handled just at a local level. Because we have a holistic overview of what's happening at a global level and we can help the local teams to ensure that they are putting in actions that are really going to help them succeed. We review the evidence. So now the industry is moving towards CAPA effectiveness checks. That Band-Aid approach of saying this is broken, this is what we've done to fix it, is not really standing up. It's all that continuous improvement, making sure that it doesn't happen again 1 or 2 years down the line. Who needs to be ready? So if we think about our model, not everything is done in-house for a pharmaceutical company, depending on your size. So I think all the company employees across those different functions that touch on the PV system, but also all agents of the company. So if we're outsourcing our local pharmacovigilance person in the country to a vendor, then obviously they need to be ready. If we're using contractors or CROs to do our clinical trials, or we're using distributors and vendors for case processing, when we're inspected, they're an extension of our organization and they all need to be ready. So if you're sat here working in the healthcare but not for a sponsor company, your pharmaceutical company should be making sure you're inspection ready as well, because you are an extension of the company. And essentially, anyone who receives safety information in their normal course of their daily work needs to be inspection ready. I'm here on behalf of Takeda and also presenting. If somebody came to me with, a complaint about our product, I need to be able to take that information somewhere. So this is a diagram that I use quite often, and it talks about inspection readiness. It talks about people, integrity, and excellence, and it's divided up into different steps. Sometimes, like in the US, we have the FDA. They just turn up. They just knock on the door, we're here. We don't know if they're going to be there for 1 day, 1 week. You know, we've had experiences of where they come in and they're doing a GCP inspection, looking at trials, and then they say we're staying on longer to look at pharmacovigilance, or we're looking at, you know, you don't know. So with those unannounced inspections, we talk about being inspection ready at all times. But that means different things to different people. So what we have here is, in an ideal scenario, in the UK, MHRA give you 2 to 3 months notice. A lot of the European agencies will give you the same 1 to 2 months notice. So those steps could be, you know, weeks. It could be months that you're working on these different aspects. If they walk through the door unannounced, or you've got a week's notice, then you might have to cram that all into, you know, hours and days. But what we're essentially talking about here is understanding the inspection process. How many of you have read the Arab GVPs, the Good Pharmacovigilance Practice pieces of legislation? So there's different pieces of legislation governing the activities that we do, and that's where we start. And then we complete training. We make sure your job descriptions and CVs are up to date, because the inspectors may pick. They can actually pick and speak to anybody that they wish in the organization. So if you're in commercial, they may pull you in and ask you, you know, if you receive safety information, how do you report it? So we share previous audit inspection findings. We review our internal checklists. We do logistical planning. You know, how are the rooms going to be organized? Who's going to host? Who's going to be in the back room, in the war room, pulling documents and all of that? So that's the initial stage. You know, what does your inspection management process look like? Then we dive into a little bit more detail, where we start reviewing the documentation, the procedures. We start doing mock interviews. We start looking for those risk areas and how to mitigate those, and filing those deviations. It's really important that if you identify non-compliances in the healthcare industry, that you have a mechanism for reporting and documenting those. Because if the inspectors come in and identify something and you can't demonstrate that you self-identified it, then that's an observation that's going to be handled in a very different manner than if you've self-identified something and you are investigating and putting some actions in place. And then we identify subject matter experts. We do mock interviews. So we say to them, you know, the inspectors picked on you, they're talking to you, you know, how would you behave in this type of scenario? These are the questions they would ask you. So we go through a readiness program. At the end of the day, we in industry are all qualified. We have people within the organization with the skill set, education, and experience to do their jobs. So they need to be able to demonstrate to the regulators that they are the experts. And that quality plays an important role to help those individuals get ready, because everybody has different levels of exposure of working with the different regulators. We have a kick-off meeting where we talk about, you know, the course of the inspection, and then we go through the logistics so everybody knows how the inspection is going to be conducted and what they need to do during that duration. And then we're really printing documents and having them ready. The inspectors sometimes give us requests. We had an experience in Australia. We were all flying at the weekend, but requests were coming in over the weekend for documents to be ready on day one in the room. Document requests can vary. Some inspections you get 10 documents, other inspections you could get 300 documents. So you need to be prepared to be able to triage and get those documents into the room. Inspections vary in duration, as I mentioned, you know, but also timing. Some inspectors like the 9 to 5. Some inspectors won't tell you, and it could be 7 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and they're still on site plowing through all those documents. So where are authorities actively inspecting? I've touched on the US FDA. I've touched on MHRA. I've got a list here. It's not all-inclusive, but it's based on inspections that I'm aware of through my regulatory agency network. We have Saudi Arabia on there. We've got Egypt up the top, so evolving. I've put Arab GVPs, China, India, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Egypt. So the World Health Organization and the MHRA play an active role in helping different health authorities get ready for inspections. They go out there, they train them on how to inspect organizations, what to look for, what are the trends. So if you've been through an MHRA inspection, then I think you've got a good sort of expectation. If you haven't been through one of those, then I think the local ones all vary based on the inspectorate's inspection program. FDA unannounced, they focus on safety reporting, they focus on the quality management system, deviations and CAPAs. European health authorities, they have different concepts. There is a concept of Supersite, where your pharmacovigilance system is too large to be inspected, and you go on maybe, if you're classified as a Supersite, you could be on a 5-year program and inspected every year. If typically the FDA come around every 2 years. If it's GMP, they're at your manufacturing site every 2 years. In the EU for PV, again, it's 2 to 3 years. Health Canada are inspecting. Their focus is really unexpected lack of effect, quality management system and training. And Swiss Medic, they're focusing a lot on the Swiss PV requirements. They're not in the EU, so they have their own program, and they are also looking at causality assessments. So I think it's really important to understand that all the regulators have their own legislation that they inspect against. We have the EU GVP modules, if you haven't read those. There's about 16 plus loads of addendums. So I think there's lots of reading if you're interested in the PV space. But when we have inspections, they're looking, if we think about global and where we are, sometimes the legislation is just being copied. So what's in the EU is being copied into the different countries. So recent examples are the Arab GVPs, legislation in India. I think October maybe there was some legislation implemented for PV in Pakistan. I understood Egypt have just been trained on how to inspect. So, you know, it's just watch this space, because I think it's becoming more and more prominent in you know, the APAC regions and also in the Middle East. The implementation of compliance questionnaires. So MHRA used to typically send out compliance questionnaires to organizations to gather information about their compliance and help them with their risk-based inspection program. Now, because the MHRA have their own intelligence and data that they collect, that has stopped. But other countries are sort of adopting that approach. So there are questionnaires now going out by other countries to gather information. And there is a lot of focus on quality management system, because I think if you don't have an adequate quality management system, it's almost like they're the pillars that support your pharmacovigilance system. And in the absence of a well-defined quality management system, so that's your procedures, your training, your audit program, deviations, CAPAs, all of that. If that's not well-defined, then you're going to be at risk, you know, complying with, you know, some of the different standards. It may be ISO standards, it may be the GVP modules. At a local country level, there is a lot of focus on the local contact person for pharmacovigilance. There is also a lot of focus on the roles and the products licensed in the country and the processes that govern those. So at a local country, for example, in Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of focus on the scientific officer. So if you're a scientific officer and you're nominated, there's some responsibilities that you have, training of pharmacy students. So there's different pieces included in the legislation that are not a requirement in the EU. So it's really important that you read and review your legislation. I'm going to talk a little bit about different findings, and this helps you because essentially what regulators are seeing helps you get ready for inspection readiness. So if you're reviewing industry trends, then that's great. So at the moment, reference safety information, it is a hot topic, but if we look at where we are with reference safety information, it's the information that's used. So if we think about how many of you, when you're taking medication, actually open your pack and read that leaflet that's in your medication, your patient information leaflet, or your SMPC? Yeah. So all those processes, and they go through a thorough review and approval, and folks like regulatory, medical, commercial, they're all involved in putting together that final pack. And that all comes in scope of a pharmacovigilance inspection. Signal management, we've had some major findings around quality management. I think I can't emphasize the quality management system enough. And those that are familiar with ISO standards will also understand where I'm coming from. So this just shows you how the trends have changed over from 2016 to 2017 through to 2017 to 2018. So the MHRA published this data, and it's available on the government website, so www.gov.uk. You'll be able to go in and pull their actual reports, and there's a link there. I've added the TGA because their inspection program's relatively new, but it just shows you the trends. You know, when we look at the legislation, and we look at what's happening in the different countries, there's no real surprises. Those trends are the same. You know, here if we look at, we've got safety issues, major findings, the top sort of 4 or 5 categories: collection and collation of adverse drug reactions, management of those ADRs, ongoing safety evaluation, and management of reference safety information. So if we think about new safety information, we're learning something new about our product. We go through, we analyze it, and then we need to go and make some changes and update promotional materials, update those little leaflets that you have in your medicine packs. All of that is in the pharmacovigilance inspection scope. So GCP, for those that are involved in trials, I think, you know, that there's a lot of work that the MHRA are doing with regards to good clinical practice. We have the CTFG guidance. So if you're not familiar with that, I think that's another document that's worth a read. There's a Q&A as well that talks about reference safety information. So by reference safety information, we're talking about the labels in the packs. We're talking about your SMPCs. And if there is a piece of safety information that comes in, one of the hot trends around inspections is that safety information needs to be assessed against the RSI that was approved at the time of that adverse drug reaction or serious adverse event that was reported. So if you're not performing those analyses with the right pieces of information, then obviously that's a risk area. So what happens if your inspection's not successful? There's different consequences for poor inspections or for an inspection that's not successful. Failure to demonstrate remediation of previous inspection finding automatically puts you at risk, and that inspection finding can then be upgraded to the next level. So if you had a major finding and you didn't remediate, when the inspectors come up, potential critical. Some inspectorates may put you on an annual inspection program, and that is a huge resource consumption for an organization. If they're not happy with the way you're remediating activities, they might decide that actually they're going to have monthly or quarterly calls with you. They want periodic updates, and remediation efforts just become more costly and just resource consuming. They might decide that they want periodic meetings with you. You may have to go to their offices. It could really negatively impact your current approvals or future filings. They may require a response within a certain time frame. In the US, the FDA issue 483 letters. There's enforcement actions, like in France. You've got infringement notices, injunction letters published by the ANSM in France. So basically, it impacts the reputation of your organization, because if you get enforcement actions and warning letters and things, they are made available in the public domain. If you just Google, Health Canada publishes a lot of their information. So it's really important that you are inspection ready. If you're working in the healthcare industry, supporting pharmaceutical companies, if they're outsourcing activities to you, then that's really important that you work in collaboration with your sponsor to make sure that you're inspection ready. So that's really all I wanted to cover today, and we've got a couple of minutes for questions. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much. What we're going to do, we need you on the stage. We're going to have a Q&A session. So we're going to limit it to 3 questions, just to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask. And obviously, you can interact with Raj, you know, in the networking session, because we want to make sure we have so much content today, so many things going on. So let's begin.
Thanks for your attention. Thank you.
A big round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much.